Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, the podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time poor but enthusiasm rich primary teachers. This week, we welcome back Ian Timbrell. Hi, Ian. It's great to have you back. How are you?
Yes, lovely. Thank you for having me back. I know both been talking about the sunshine, haven't we? But it is lovely to be filming even on this lovely sunny day.
Yeah, because I reckon by the time this episode goes out, people will have started filtering into their holidays, which is normally the time the rain comes.
Yes, and I'm in Wales, so guaranteed it will be raining for 6 weeks, and then September will come, and we will have the glorious sunshine, guaranteed.
So I'm really looking forward to this because we talked about the sort of laying the foundations last week, and now we're going to look at implementation and then potential reflection. I thought I'd start by asking, what does meaningful implementation actually look like day to day, perhaps in both a school and in a classroom, if there's a difference between the two?
I think it comes to what we mean by meaningful, and it really comes down to this. This whole section is going to be about. I remember there was a phase in inspections where the Welsh inspector at Eston always used to say, "So what?" It's that question of so what. And I think when it comes down to identifying whether something is meaningful, whether it is working, I'll ask you the question of so what. Okay, so you're learning about a role model, Alan Turing, someone like that. So what? What difference has it made in your school? And I think that's the most important thing when we're framing all of this work is you might be doing something incredibly different to the school down the road. Great. As long as you can show that that has a positive impact in your school, whether that is an impact on children feeling represented, children feeling that they are seen, bullying going down, that people are more confident in this area. It doesn't matter what the impact is, but that's what I'd say to really identify whether something's meaningful is that you can tell me why it matters and what difference it's making.
Yeah, so it's almost you're not putting sort of unnecessary systems in place for, linking back to the last episode. We're not going to tick off all the things that we've done. It's about what the change is for the experience of the pupils and perhaps the staff as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I know they are the easy things to do. And I think back to my teaching before I started this work, and I was totally guilty of that stuff. I would do a token LGBT lesson, LGBT History Month. We would learn about Alan Turing in 1 month. I'd wear a rainbow flag every now and again without really thinking about actually what difference does it make. And we can easily fall into those virtue signaling traps. But no one ever asked me, well, why are you doing that and what impact does it have? And I think if someone had have asked me that, I probably would have reflected actually and gone, but you know what, to be honest, this is a bit of a waste of time.
And do you reckon the experience of the teacher is different? Like, for instance, in your classroom, what's the impact in my classroom? Does that change with the class? Or are you sort of feeding from the systems that are in place, or a bit of both?
I think there's a bit of both, isn't it? There's the general culture around a school, and the culture will determine things like how open people are about talking about these things. The culture will determine how bullying is tackled, how confident kids are about coming out. So those type of things are really from a whole school perspective. But within each classroom, then, this is where the curriculum is really strong. And I remember I taught year six a couple of years ago, and we didn't have teaching about transgender identities in our curriculum specifically. We didn't feel that the children in our school were ready for it, and actually introducing it could have introduced a load of misconceptions. So we had a good relationship with the secondary school, and they did it in year seven. But one year I had a girl in my class whose brother had transitioned, and she was getting a lot of bullying because of it. So we made a conscious decision to change the curriculum just for this 1 year group to tackle that issue. So teachers need to have the confidence to know what the expectations in their school, but also have that flexibility to change their curriculum based on what the individual needs of their class. So, there's a lot of discussion about teaching about gender identity and teaching about children who are thinking about their gender. Now, no one's got the 100% right answer on this. As we're recording, actually, we're literally awaiting the gender questioning guidance. So it'd be really interesting to see what happens in England with that. But actually, for the majority of primary school children, they don't necessarily need specific lessons on gender identity, but you may need to do it. For example, if a pupil comes out as non-binary, a bit of work maybe need to be done there. So it's about being flexible and about the teachers having the confidence to be flexible.
And is it almost about tying it back to some of your experience? It's about the pupils and the children knowing that they're not alone if they sort of are getting an inkling, or I don't know how to describe it, but
Yeah, it's our mantra at More Than Flags and Rainbows is we want every child to be safe, seen, and supported, and this is really where the seen bit comes in. So I mean, I'm very passionate, and we'll talk a bit later on about the gay lesson. I hate the gay lesson. I think they should be banned in schools because they're dreadful, and we'll talk a bit more about that later on. But children need to see people who are diverse, though. They need to see in foundation phase and foundation stage. They need to see different types of families. They need to see parents with families with a mum and dad, families with two mums, two dads, one mum, one dad, grandparents, foster parents. They need to see that every family is slightly different. So that's the first thing. And when we move into sort of key stage two, they need to start seeing LGBT role models. They need to start seeing these people in a real life context, that these people exist. So if they are sat there either questioning themselves who they are, but it also might be for a child, for example, who's got two dads, to see gay people in the world, they're seeing people who represent their dads as well. So it's not just about them, it's about seeing people who may be related to them. And then you've got the other end. I mean, there's a friend of mine runs a charity for people with dwarfism, and she wrote a book about dwarfism and went into a school and they said, well, we don't need that book. We haven't got anyone with dwarfism in our school. And she said, well, that's exactly the reason why you should have it. And if you've got a school with low levels of diversity, whatever diversity we're talking about, but particularly if you've got pupils who aren't coming out, or you haven't got parents who are confident telling you that they're, for instance, two mums or two dads in a family, that's even more reason to have diversity in your curriculum, so that, yeah, those pupils are not only seeing people who look like them and are like people they know, but also they're seeing that there's total diversity outside of their world as well.
I'm thinking back to the Ireland that I grew up in, and you know, it wasn't diverse in any sense, from my memory, and it was very divided down a particular religious line. And that's what I'm thinking of, is like, we would have benefited from sort of, we were given one representation of the world, and I'm sure that wasn't pleasant for the people who perhaps didn't have a mum or a dad and that kind of thing, So, like I say,
Yeah,
it's
I went to a very large secondary school in Bridgend, and we had one person of colour in our year group, in a year group of 350 kids. And I remember myself asking him questions that now I realise were wildly inappropriate, but it didn't come from a place of malice. It came from, well, I'd never seen someone who was black before. I didn't know that they were different. And that's the fault of my school. The school obviously had not created a curriculum that was representative. So I was asking these questions out of genuine curiosity, but it put who was genuinely my friend in a really uncomfortable situation. So, yeah, if you've got the less diversity you have, really, the more diverse your curriculum should be.
in your book. You mention the how ideas have changed over a long period of time. For instance, in ancient Greece and in ancient Rome, would it be attitudes to sexuality would be the best way to describe it, were entirely different
Oh, completely.
to
Yeah,
what
there
we.
was no specific word for homosexuality, for example, in Greece. Sexuality was, we view sexuality as very, very binary, certainly in modern Western culture, where you either are straight, you're gay, or you're bisexual, essentially. And even bisexuality has issues. Many people sort of describe it as a phase. There's a lot of erasure, despite it being the biggest group in the LGBT community. Um, it is really interesting how things have changed over time. And I find this fascinating. But yeah, in ancient Greece, of course, we have to remember there was no such thing as ancient Greece, because actually it was just a load of city states that were loosely connected. But each of those had different views of sexuality and identity. And so we see different parts of history where sexuality was really liberal, I suppose that we would say now. And in a way, we regressed. And that is due to the glorious British Empire, who put in a very, very many colonial laws which banned sexualities apart from straight. So, we have seen these things do change over time. And as you said, it's over a long period of time that we see this change.
I love that level of pedantry. The corrective in the ancient Greece. That is
Oh,
excellent.
I'm a huge history nerd, honestly. And I remember we went to Crete. So I got married 5 weeks ago and we went to Crete for a little mini moon, just a little honeymoon after we got married. And there was this American tour group, and the very loudest person was telling everyone completely wrong things about ancient Greece. And I had to bite my tongue. Both of us were sort of like biting our tongues not to walk over because they were also being so loud. No, I am a huge history nerd, and it is really fascinating how things have changed over time. Um, one of my favorite facts, I think I might have said it in the last podcast, is the word "gay" was only used really for the first time to describe men who attract to men in the 1960s. It's actually a really new term. My favorite thing about that is many people will say that it stands for "good as you." And a way of people being proud of their identity. Unfortunately, it's total crap. It's not real. Um, It'd be a lovely story if it was true, but it's not true. It was invented a lot later on. To be honest, lots of these things, particularly to do with sexuality, we don't really know a lot because many people did it in secret because it was illegal. So we don't know where lots of these words came from or how people did things because it had to be secret because you didn't want to be arrested for being a homosexual.
These are the kind of things that I think, so if we're looking at sort of permeating the entire curriculum, and you mentioned curriculum in your previous response, these are the kind of thing, the options we have in terms of hinterland and things like that there is an indication of success of your approach to sort of creating an inclusive environment, embedding everything across the curriculum, or should we, because I don't think we wanted to confine it to PSHE or assemblies. What's the approach in terms of the curriculum? For instance, Turing features, I think, in most curricula because of his contribution to mathematics and computing, and obviously the war effort and stuff. Do we tell that broader story? I mean, what would your approach be
Well,
in a wider
The,
sense?
there's lots of resources out there, for example, which will have in primary, you look at a picture book with two parents, you talk about it, and it becomes like a PSHE lesson. And then in secondary school, you'll look at sort of the history of racism and slavery in Black History Month, and you'll look at LGBT rights, maybe the Stonewall riots in LGBT History Month. I think that's better than nothing. Look, if your school isn't doing much at all and you're doing those, it is better than do nothing. But the issue I have with it is what you're saying is that LGBT history is only for 1 month of the year, where actually it is so intertwined with our history. It is so, the every single person who's between the age of sort of 40 and 50 will have gone through school at a time where it was illegal to talk about homosexuality in schools due to a clause called Section 28. And so it is intertwined in our history. And so if we box these into particular months, what are we saying the rest of the year? Are we just deleting that from our history? If you are talking about Margaret Thatcher and learning about Margaret Thatcher, you should be talking about Section 28 and homosexuality being illegal because it was one of the most profoundly impactful things she did as prime minister. And if you're then not including that as part of your history curriculum, you're not really representing the real world. So that's the risk of boxing things into months, is that actually what we do is we say that, oh, we're not going to talk about these things the rest of the month. So that's the first thing. But also, it comes down to this gay lesson. What we're going to do, we're going to put pictures of 3 gays on the board, and we're going to go, this, everyone is a gay. This is what they are. This is what they have in common. And it has huge risks. One, what you do is point out to everyone in the class that they're different, they're unusual. They're not really part of our community because we have to learn about them separately. But also, there's huge risk of stereotyping. It often falls on celebrities who don't necessarily represent most LGBT people. So there's a lot of pitfalls you can fall into by doing these siloed lessons. But what I want to say to listeners, really, if you are doing that, don't feel guilty about it. I did it myself in school. At least it's a start. But yeah, what we need to progress to is then embedding it all year round. I'm not saying you have to have a gay in every lesson, but it's about actually representing the world as it actually is, not a sterilized version of it.
And where would you go for inspiration? Because obviously, if someone doesn't know about, for instance, the Tudor period, they go to the historical association. Is there anyone writing about or like blogging about how we can sort of make these connections across the curriculum in a really meaningful way?
Yeah, I mean, this because until 2003 it was illegal to talk about homosexuality in schools. This is still relatively new, and there are resources out there that talk about them. And I'm going to be very honest, with you, they are limited. The thing I would say to you to please do not do is use AI, because actually I've tested it quite a lot, and I came up with amazing historical figures. But it was completely wrong. Dates were wrong, people were wrong, it had made assumptions about people. And so you need to be very, very careful. What I'd say is if you use AI as a starting point, give me LGBT figures from the Tudor times, please, please, please make sure that you fact check them, because, we're literally recording this in the week where Grok, which is the AI on X, I don't know if you saw yesterday, Kieran, started labeling itself as Mecha Hitler. And started saying that Hitler was amazing. So it's now been corrected, by the way, but still, it did that. AI is not accurate because it scrapes the internet for facts, but as we know, anyone can put anything on the internet. So if you do use AI, please just fact check it. But what I'd say is, certainly in secondary, loads of different organizations are making packs and making resources to help in this area. So, for example, the Institute for Physics has got examples of physics people, who are inventors, scientists through history, and that are diverse. So that's the best place to look if you look at the specific industry and try to find examples. Now, you can also check the More Than Flags and Rainbows website. We are developing loads of resources for schools. Follow us on Instagram, because we're starting to release more and more resources to help schools in this area, because it is hard to find.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. It's that build your expertise bit by bit, just like you would with any subject that you were sort of developing your um expertise in. And yeah, I think definitely I'll signpost your website in the show notes and things like that there, because I think that'll be really helpful
And
for
one thing I'd say, when I work with schools, I love a challenge, right? So if you've got an area where you can't find anything, please drop me an email. And I love doing the research, because I'll share a post about it, and that will help another school as well. And I think don't be afraid to ask for help either, because this is new for us all. None of us grew up with this education. So, if you are a maths teacher and you want some examples of diverse mathematicians through history, drop me an email and I'll find you some, and then I can make a resource for the schools. So that's the way lots of our resources at More Than Flags and Rainbows have been made, actually, because it's been from requests from people. And then for some subjects, it is much easier in some subjects than others. For example, English is so much easier to do because you can look at diverse text. My favorite chapter probably in my book is gay woodwork. So I was really pleased with that title, because there's no such thing as gay woodwork, right? There is no such thing. And in certain subjects, you're not necessarily going to make the actual subject diverse. But what we can do is look at actually who's taking our subject. So DT, for example, at GCSE, who's taking our subject? Is there a skew towards boys, for example? Is there a skew towards white people, for example? Where are we getting minority and underrepresented groups to actually come into our subject? And that's how some subjects can get diversity through their curriculum, is not by necessarily the content of the curriculum, but by working out, right, who is actually doing this subject and why aren't others doing it? And that can be really powerful.
Yeah, I actually was at a conference recently where a drama teacher was talking about the uptake on design and technology in general. And it's, if you look at the graph, it's almost like a triangle, and it's the little tiny bit at the bottom, so I think
Yeah,
I
it
think
is. Yeah. Yeah.
they're asking who's doing our subject. That's all.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to laugh at the design and technology community. um,
Absolutely not.
one of the signs that a school's approach to inclusion is perhaps performative rather than transformative.
So the first step to me doing this work was I was invited into a school, and there were all the visual signs everywhere. And at first glance, you'd walk through and think this was a really inclusive school. And that might be your school, where you walk through, everyone's got rainbow lanyards, pin badges, you've got a pride club, you have a pride event, all things like that. And there's two real ways to work out, actually, what whether it's working is, first of all, you have to talk to the kids or the young people. That's the only real way. And there's two sort of measures. The first is, do people come out in your school? In primary school, probably you're talking about year 6. It is a minority of pupils, but it does happen. Is most primary schools I go to now, at least one pupil will come out in year 6. Is that happening in your school? Secondary school, we should see 8% of your school population coming out, because actually that is the rough percentage. And if we haven't, why not? What is it about the culture of your school that is stopping that from happening? And I think that those are the two real measures. Is that speaking to people, that confidence to come out, and then actually the levels of bullying in school. Now, there are too many schools I go to, though, where they say, oh, homophobic bullying is really, really low. And when I dig into it, it's because it's not recorded. So it's not necessarily that you have low levels of homophobic bullying. It's that when you do have it, it's tackled really, really well. And that's both of those things I find out by talking to the young people, and they are very open. I go straight. I get most of my information when I work in a school and I do a health check in school from the pupils, because they will tell you those things. How many pupils are coming out, and how is bullying tackled in this school? And actually, that's where our measures come from.
And have you got any examples where student voice helped reshape a school's approach to inclusion?
Yeah, absolutely. So I recently worked with a school who had a pride club. About 10 kids went every now and again. It was fine. It was sort of ticking along. But when I then interviewed a group of pupils about it, what we found was the pupils who were actually going to this pride club were the ones who were out, confident, and to be honest, it wasn't really clear what they were getting out of it. The pupils actually you'd want going to your pride club are the pupils who aren't out yet, the pupils who feel like they're being bullied and they need a safe space, the pupils who want more information, the pupils who want to make a network. And actually, this pride club did not cater for that in any way. And so majority of LGBT pupils were not welcome in a way in this club. So we did a huge amount of work. We started from scratch about this Pride Club. We renamed it. We did a big launch event and made it clear that it was for everyone. And the demographic of it very, very quickly changed. Actually, we made clear we wanted more allies to come than we wanted LGBT people, because actually they probably aren't allies. They're probably just the kids who haven't come out yet. And that's actually the ones you want going to your pride club. So really quickly, it changed to something that was incredibly impactful, because, we knew that those kids going there now, it wasn't just a nice lunchtime club. Actually, it was making a tangible difference to inclusion in that school. And that all came from the kids telling us that this club wasn't working. So you do have to listen to them. They have great ideas, and they will really give you that honest view of what your school is like and what's working and what's not.
Yeah, as soon as you mentioned that, I thought, yeah, the name might have encouraged that sort of the response from the group. What sort of options do schools have, do you think? I mean, is there a way to do it without being twee, or without, or like being
Yeah, I
subtle
mean, I've
enough?
been to ones where it's been like the Prism Club. That was quite a nice one. That, to be honest, that was probably the best one I've ever been to. It was a club where anyone could go for any reason, and they said that actually this club is to celebrate diversity, so anyone can go, and that includes like straight white boys. Because straight white boys should be represented and celebrated as well. It's really important that everyone feels safe. But in there, then what they did is workshops around gender identity, sexuality, race, religion, things like that. And yeah, just changing that name to like Prism Club just took away that stigma, first of all, of it being that. But also, I often ask this question to other schools. Great, you've got an LGBT club. Where's your club with kids of different religions? Where's your club for kids with disabilities? Where's your club for kids who are neurodiverse? Actually, if we open this up to a club where everyone is welcome, then actually you can make a huge impact on your school and a lot of kids. So, but actually turn it over to the young people. Do a little competition, come up with a name, come up with a logo. Don't stress yourself out about it. Get them to do it, because actually they will, I promise you, they will come up with far more creative ideas. Actually, our logo, More Than Flags and Rainbows, was developed by a pupil. I did a little competition, and she was in Monmouth, and she was the only free school meal pupil in her school. And she won the national competition. And when I presented her with 100 quid of Amazon vouchers, and she just turned around to me and went, I've never won anything before. And my heart just melted just a little bit. And actually, you as a teacher shouldn't be determining what the name of this club is, what the logo is, what the purpose of it is. It should all come from the young people, because at the end of the day, it is for them.
Yeah, and that's been a thread that's been running through all of the the discussion we've had so far. I thought you were going to say whenever you give her the Amazon voucher, she's all, "Where's the porcelain doll?"
Yeah. No, honest, bless her. She, yeah, it was a really heartwarming moment just to know. I didn't know this about her when I picked her design. I genuinely picked her design because it was the best one, and it just shows you shouldn't underestimate kids.
No, absolutely. At your peril, you underestimate them.
Yeah, absolutely.
What sort of professional development approaches have you seen work really well? I mean, I'm assuming that you base your approach around the things that have gone well for you in school before, particularly when it comes to building staff confidence and perhaps a bit of fluency. I don't know if that's the right word to describe it, but, awareness.
Yeah, I mean, when I get contacted by schools to deliver training, because that's my bread and butter, the first thing they sort of talk about is, can we get an inclusive curriculum? And I'm like, right, hold, stop, let's take a step backwards. And generally, my training is split into two halves, and that's the way I've restructured the book. Is the first half is understanding the why this work is so important. Let's make sure that staff understand what we're doing here, and actually the impact of not doing this work is really important. And then we need to break down all of the misconceptions around vocabulary, around what LGBTQIA plus means, what gender means, what sex means, the fact that actually these phrases are fluid and changing all the time, and they mean different things to different people. I was only on Instagram this morning and someone put a definition of bisexuality that I disagreed with, but that's okay. It's about opening people's minds to go, actually, there isn't just a right and wrong answer to this stuff, so it's okay if you think different to other people. So getting those things out of the way initially before you even mention curriculum is really important, because people need to feel confident with it. They also need to feel confident that they don't know what this stuff means. That's okay. I think we have inadvertently created a culture where people feel guilty about not knowing what this stuff means, and I want people to take that pressure off themselves. No one knows everything about this stuff. We're all learning all the time. So that's the first half, is all about that. Why is this important and what does it all mean? And then move into your curriculum when you're ready. And what I often do with the training when I work in schools is give people at least a couple of weeks to digest it. I have done it in an inset day and it can work. The approach is slightly different. But actually what often works really well is leaving a couple of weeks gap for people to digest it, people to maybe come to terms with the fact that their own views have been challenged. And then we can talk about actually what is this going to look like in our school? And one of the really effective things that you can do is start by creating a statement of inclusion. So actually, let's put down loads of words and phrases that, in an ideal world, what would our curriculum look like? And actually come up with a statement of inclusion that we can actually measure it against. Great. So how do we know if maths is inclusive? Well, does it meet this statement of inclusion? And in the book, I talk step by step about how to do that. But it's about not jumping to curriculum first. Actually, curriculum is probably the last place that you should be going. We need to get the foundations right first.
It's almost the chunk of the book that we've skipped over in these episodes, but I thought you're likely to be doing that kind of thing on a day-to-day basis. And I think, I think the government should get every school at least one copy of your book to use as a guideline, 100%.
That would be great. if we can make that happen, Kieran, that'd be great.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any current ministers on my guest list coming up, but
have a word.
We shall see. Yeah, and I don't say that lightly. We talked about doing like recommendations and stuff earlier on, but I talk to publishers all the time, and this, like I said, jumped out at me. Couldn't stop reading it, and I think it would be immensely useful in schools. But I didn't think the opening chapters would transfer to the audio format very well. It's almost like it's like a dialogue rather than here's Ian telling us all about, basically reading the chapter and stuff. So I think you're absolutely spot on. What can schools do to maintain momentum and to make sure that they get past year one or they get past month one, and so it doesn't get replaced by the next initiative, which can happen often in schools?
Yeah, and I think this comes down to really understanding that why question again, because if you really understand, if every single member of staff in your school understands the impact that this work can have, it should remain top priority. But it should also be, I feel, interwoven. So there's a tendency when school development plans that you'll have your diversity target or your inclusion target, and it doesn't really sit in. Actually, what we should be doing is look, right, okay, this is what we want to achieve through diversity and inclusion. What does that look like in English? What in the English action plan? What does that look like in the maths action plan? So they're not separate things, they're working together, because, the English department, for example, if they've got their own action plan to do, adding the diversity and inclusion is adding one more thing on, and they might not have time for it. So it's making sure that this is interwoven into all of the other targets. And rather than it being like target number 4, let's put it as a cross target that threads through it all. So because then you have to can keep that momentum, because if you don't do it, you're not meeting what's in the action plan. It can be far easier to go, oh, we'll leave that whole target till next year. Whereas actually, if it's interwoven through all the other subjects or through all your other targets, actually it becomes part and parcel of what you're doing every day. So I think that's, that would be my advice, to create it as a, it's just like a cross-curricular target, and then you'll see a much bigger impact and a much better investment from different subject leaders.
Would it be right to presume that after the first year, you've done a lot of the heavy lifting, and then you're really just sort of tweaking and making sure things, is this impactful? If it's not, we're going to change this little bit, this aspect. Is that typically what you
do? It's thinking about, actually, it's learning. So you've done your first year where you've looked, probably in the first year, you're looking at policies, safeguarding, basics of the curriculum. And it's about actually, how do we give teachers the opportunity to learn themselves? Are we giving them professional development opportunities to go and see other schools who are doing this work, who are given time to read books? One of the most impactful things we did in our school was a book club. And it was part of everyone's directed time. They were given time to do it, but actually the whole staff read the same book, and we did our professional development around the book, and that worked really effectively. We didn't do the whole book; we did different chapters, and that can work really, really well, and that can really help uplift everyone. So in your second year, look at, actually, what do we need to learn? Let's learn as a whole staff. Let's look at, right, we're going to get a copy of this book for everyone. We're going to all read chapter 3. What does this matter? But yeah, it's not thinking, okay, we're done after the first year. It's about, where do we need to go next? And what don't we know? That's the biggest question, I think, is what don't we know and what do we need to learn as a whole school?
Yeah, so utilizing that team that you'll have built at the start, like you talked about last time, and that team are constantly thinking about how are things going and where are the gaps in our knowledge, that kind of thing.
And I think about changing that team, that team, the risk of keeping that team static, of looking at this area, is they have their own lived experience, they have their own limited lived experience, and actually we need to keep that team changing. So bringing in new people so that there are new, fresh ideas, new perspectives, actually, because they might spot things that other people haven't. Particularly around areas so large as like disability and neurodiversity. Again, so I have ADHD. That is only one aspect of neurodiversity. It doesn't mean I can see how to help all neurodivergent people. So changing who is looking at this area, don't change all of them, because you don't want to start from scratch every year, but switching up that group, adding in new people can bring in those new perspectives and spot things that maybe the others didn't.
In my mind, if we follow the approach you've outlined over these 2 episodes, you're very unlikely to get any backlash because you brought the community with you. That was part and parcel. In instances where there perhaps might be internal or external sort of backlash, for lack of a better word, do you have any advice for those leaders, those groups, those teachers, in terms of how they might best approach it? Probably for their own mental well-being, but also in terms of, maybe they've missed something in terms of bringing the whole community together. What would you say?
So I think the first thing, is the difference between a backlash in terms of you've got protests outside the gate, you've got half of your parents not sending the kids to school. That is very different to individual parents. The vast majority of schools, you're bound to get at least one. So, but that's not necessarily a failure on your part, but it's how we work with them. So regarding, the parents, the first thing is you need to have 100% total transparency. Nothing should be secret in your school. The second you hide something, it feeds into the misinformation. It feeds into the fact that this is some insidious plot to indoctrinate the children. So that's the first thing is, be total transparent. If a parent wants to see any of the resource you use, what I'd say is don't necessarily send it out, but invite them in, show them, talk to them about the work. But actually, what very often happens with this work when it's really successful is you will get a parent who sort of doorsteps a teacher. It's the end of the day, it's 3:30, the teacher's trying to get all the kids out, and they'll come and make a complaint. Oh, why are you reading this book? I don't want my son reading this book. You're teaching him to be gay. And what I do with schools is develop a script. So we develop a script that they can say on the doorstep so they don't get dragged into that argument there and then, because actually they've got 30 kids to get out the door. So the script goes along the lines of, You've told me that you think we're teaching your son to be gay. Our values in this school are, you say the value, that we want everyone in our family to feel represented and safe. We use this book because we have some families in the school with 2 mums and 2 dads. If you want more information, book an appointment at the office. So you sort of set up your stall very clearly. If you've acknowledged what they've said, you've said the values of your school, you've said why you're doing that work, but you're not getting dragged into an argument, because if they want to talk about it more, they need to book an appointment at the office. And actually training our staff up on that script can be really helpful to stop that teacher getting dragged into an argument that they are never, ever going to win. And then, sorry, heads and deputies, you get paid the big bucks, then you can deal with it. But at least then, if you've, given that little break, they've got the time to get their things together. But it's about standing up for your school. And actually, those parents don't have to send their kids to your school. It is not a prison. They can choose another school in the local area in vast majority of cases. And when they send their children to your school, they agree to the values of your school. And actually, if you give in for that one pupil, if you give in your values are, I'm really sorry to say it, but they are a bit meaningless, because you're picking and choosing. So we have to stand up for what we do, but we also have to educate. And that's why when you do this script, is you explain exactly why this is used. So that's parents. Now, staff is slightly different. Again, your school is not a prison. And if teachers, TAs, lunchroom supervisors are working at your school, they agree to the values of their school. And, if you have gone through all the stages that we've talked about, you have educated them on why this work is important. You have talked about what we're going to do as a school. If they disagree with it, that's absolutely fine. Everyone's entitled to their own beliefs. But if they, for 1 second, demonstrate any type of prejudice towards pupils or other staff, it's against the Equality Act. And actually, that would be a disciplinary discussion. You are allowed to believe what you want to believe, but that is no excuse for prejudice. One of the most common sort of questions I get is, what if someone says to me it's because of their religion? Now, I'm a true believer that religion doesn't spread hate. People do. That is my, I have got people who are Catholic and are trans. I know people who are Muslim and are gay. So, it's not the religion that spreads this, this hate, it's the people. And actually, those people are entitled to believe whatever they want to believe, but religion does not give you the excuse to be prejudiced. So, you have to stand your ground. You have to educate these people first. But if they are going to make any child in your school feel unsafe, then maybe it's not the place for them.
I think that's a fantastic answer. I think it's going to be really, really useful, particularly for inexperienced leaders, in terms of having that script ready to go. And like you say, passing on to senior leadership, I think establishing that kind of system can be really, really helpful. And when you were talking, I'm thinking my 10-year-old, they had an offer of an RSE meeting prior to them engaging in elements of the curriculum that were on the horizon in term 6 and stuff like that. And I thought it was really good. We didn't go ourselves, but the fact that the families in our community had the opportunity to find out what was happening, it's that transparency you're talking about, and just making the connection there.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I'm 50-50 about whether you should have an RSC meeting or not, because I think sometimes you can get the parents turning up who are, if you've got them all in a room, it can be a bit mob mentality. And I think those meetings can be really effective. I think they're most effective when they're just part of a curriculum event. So they're not necessarily specifically about diversity, inclusion, or RSE. They're just because actually show that this is just part of your curriculum. But they can, they can really help, parents to see, because the amount of misinformation is incredible out there. Only this week I've seen on Facebook a post that was like, oh gosh, in schools they're teaching 3-year-olds to use sex toys, for example. It's absolutely ludicrous nonsense. But for some parents who maybe had really negative experiences of school themselves, it's quite easy for them to believe. So yeah, we have to be really honest and really open and transparent. And quite frankly, if I was getting resources from an organization who said, oh, you're not allowed to share these with parents because of copyright issues, I would not touch them with a barge pole, because that is not fair. I'm a parent myself, and I would be a bit concerned if my school wouldn't show me anything that they were showing my son. I think that is... Copyright is no excuse. I'm sorry. We have a right to see what's going on in our schools, and 99.9% of schools do that, which is absolutely great.
The copyright people are always on to me about coming on and talking to schools about how much copyright, what they need to be doing to get it.
The problem is what these organizations don't realize is, in a way, that they assisted the misinformation, particularly, a couple of years ago when the RSE fever was at its peak, And actually, that a lot of that was because of these organizations that wouldn't allow schools to share their resources, because it just fed into that narrative that there's secret things going on in schools and kids are being groomed and they're being indoctrinated. So, I'd be very, very wary of any organization that said you couldn't share the resources with the parents because of copyright. It puts you in a very, very dangerous position.
I think anyone who listens to these episodes and then goes on to read your book, I've got a copy beside me. So it's More Than Flags and Rainbows. Available in all good and bad bookshops, I assume.
Absolutely. And if it's
Um,
not available, tell them to get a copy.
yeah, two rights. But like I'm always telling schools or teachers, use the school budget because 20 quid is minimal, so go through the school budget whenever this new school year starts and get a copy. I think what we've got is for anyone who wants to really put their effort into creating an inclusive environment, but perhaps hasn't felt, knowledgeable enough or confident enough. Really good blueprint. And so when I say, I think the government should be sort of lean on this, I absolutely mean it, Tim. So you never know. Watch this space. But all I can do is say thank you so much for your time, Ian. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on, Kieran. It's been an absolute pleasure. And hopefully get to work with some of your listeners, which would be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously we've got our conferences. I think we're in London. Not sure where the middle one's going to be, and then we're in Cardiff in September. But obviously you've got an event on that day, so
Yes,
hopefully,
I know. I'm gutted, absolutely gutted. So next time.
imagine we'll be back. But yeah, thank you very much, and everyone at home. Until next time, thanks for listening.